Imagine you're standing on a bustling city street corner where everyone around you is glued to their phone screens. You catch yourself doing the exact same thing, pulling out your device to scroll through social media feeds, and time slips away. 5 minutes turn into 30, and before you know it, the world around you fades into the background. Why are these endless streams of images and stories so captivating? What drives us to reach for our phones over and over, desperately hoping to see something new? As it turns out, the key culprit is dopamine, a clever but sometimes deceptive chemical in our brains. Today, I'll explain how this friend that's supposed to bring us pleasure can manipulate us into a dopamine trap. Most importantly, I'll show you how to break free and reclaim control over your life. We often believe that happiness and motivation are lofty ideas tied to mindset or some magical success formula. In reality, these feelings stem from chemical reactions in our brain. Dopamine is one of the primary neurotransmitters that fuels our drive and rewards us with pleasure. It provides an energy boost, lifts our mood, and compels us to take action. But like any potent substance, dopamine can backfire. It might start with something as harmless as browsing social media or indulging in tasty, high-calorie treats. The problem arises when our brains get hooked on the easy route to fleeting joy, and we lose the desire for more substantial and worthwhile pursuits. Once we grasp how this mechanism operates, we can shift our strategies, resist cheap dopamine, and finally move toward meaningful successes. To dive deeper, let's look at how dopamine functions. Picture trillions of neurons in your brain, communicating through chemical messengers. Dopamine is one of those messengers carrying signals between nerve cells. When we anticipate a reward, a delicious meal, or completing a big project, our brain releases a surge of dopamine that gives us a buzz of excitement, driving us to keep going. Interestingly, our biggest rush often occurs just before we get the reward. Think of that excitement when you're about to finish a project or cross the finish line. You sense that final push, courtesy of dopamine, motivating you to hang in there a little longer. The flip side of dopamine is that it can trap us when we opt for short bursts of stimulation too often. If we constantly sample mini rewards, like checking notifications, watching short videos, skimming endless news, or munching on junk food at the slightest boredom, we get many small spikes of dopamine but scatter our motivational energy. Then, when it's time to tackle a real challenge, there's no fuel left. Our brains, repeatedly burned out on easy pleasures, resist giving us the energy we need for bigger tasks. We slip into a cycle of burnout, apathy, and laziness, leaving us unable to focus on long-term goals. This is how people end up in what's called the dopamine pit, a perpetual state of self-stimulation. We flip, swipe, scroll, and watch, chasing little hits of novelty but never truly investing in anything substantial. It's not that social media or entertainment are evil. The issue lies in how frequently and compulsively we consume them. Our brain drains its dopamine bank account on endless micro-thrills, making us feel increasingly unmotivated for deeper objectives. We also start feeling guilty for procrastinating, our self-esteem dips, and so the downward spiral continues. Think of dopamine like money. Spending funds on trivial things all day long means you'll never save enough for a large purchase or investment. Similarly, if we squander our motivation on countless quick distractions, be it news feeds, likes, or short videos, we have little energy left for tasks that demand discipline and perseverance. Sure, it's fun to get immediate hits of gratification, but that's cheap dopamine, and it doesn't bring lasting fulfillment. As a result, our brain burns out, and we end up feeling like life is slipping away without real progress. You can see this reflected in everyday interactions. Even if we're out with friends, we might still glance at our phones whenever a notification pops up. It seems illogical to break a real conversation for a random message, but our brains are trained to seek instant stimulation. What if there's something exciting in that notification, we tell ourselves, as our fingers automatically reach for the screen. Bit by bit, this habit teaches us to chase tiny bursts of dopamine rather than fully immersing ourselves in face-to-face engagement. Our main goal isn't to demonize dopamine, but to understand it. Dopamine is an ally designed by nature to spur us towards survival and accomplishment, be it for hunting, social bonding, or learning new skills. The trouble is that the modern world offers countless synthetic sources of fast dopamine, which are far more enticing than the slower grind of meaningful work. Unless we address this, we'll grow increasingly dependent, losing our sense of deep motivation. Wondering if you're drowning in cheap dopamine? Try a test day with no social media, no casual gaming, and fewer junk food treats. If you quickly feel an overwhelming urge to just check this or that, or you find yourself mindlessly heading to the fridge for another snack when you're not really hungry, that's a clear sign of dependence. Your brain is anxious because it's used to that frequent tiny shot of dopamine, but ultimately this is just an empty cycle of draining your motivational reserves for shallow, fleeting rewards. Fortunately, there's good news. We can create a healthier approach, training ourselves to value genuine effort over instant gratification. The key is seeing the difference between cheap and expensive dopamine. Expensive dopamine comes when we finish significant tasks or undertake challenging pursuits, writing a book, completing a complex project, honing a skill. Rather than draining our reserves in tiny hits, we build them up, channeling energy into goals that truly matter. If you've ever been absorbed in a creative process or fulfilling work, you've felt this flow state. You become deeply immersed and time seems to accelerate. In such moments, dopamine is released gradually, culminating in a surge of satisfaction at the end. That feeling can linger for a while, giving you lasting happiness. That's what we might call expensive dopamine. In contrast, cheap dopamine is the quick high that vanishes almost instantly. You scroll through TikTok, get a dose of amusement, but the next moment you feel empty. This sparks the endless dopamine loop where you chase one micro hit after another. We wind up feeling drained and unaccomplished, even as we keep going back for more. Ultimately, that cheap thrill can lead to guilt and emotional burnout without meaningful progress. We need to understand the dynamic of dopamine if we want to break free. Overindulging in trivial pleasures teaches the brain, why put in the effort for a big project if I can get an immediate spark with less work? That's the root of procrastination. Deep down, we know there's important stuff to do, yet we cling to effortless pleasures, struggling to focus. Then we blame ourselves for lacking willpower when really we're misusing dopamine. One effective way to combat this is by planning a dopamine detox. That doesn't mean cutting out social media or fun altogether. It means reducing how often we engage and switching out some of those shallow triggers for more productive tasks. For instance, at the end of the day, you might think, reading requires too much effort. I'll just scroll social media for an hour. At that exact moment, you can train yourself to make the slightly harder choice, like reading, creating, or learning something, that fosters growth instead of fueling quick, empty highs. At first, you might experience a sort of withdrawal because your brain is accustomed to chasing microdoses of pleasure. But if you persist, you'll notice a freshness in how you perceive things. Your receptors recover from overstimulation, and even small joys become more vivid. It's like hitting reset on your taste buds after laying off sugary junk. Suddenly, you can savor the natural sweetness of fruit and vegetables again. I used to be stuck in an endless cycle of digital consumption, spending hours on short videos and news feeds until I realized entire days were wasted. Whenever I tried tackling major tasks, my brain would rebel, craving the next ping or meme. Eventually, I said, enough. I want real motivation back. I started gradually rejecting my habit of constantly checking my phone. It wasn't easy at first, but soon I felt a surge of energy, and accomplishing actual tasks became far more satisfying than chasing likes. It's vital to remember that dopamine isn't our only chemical driver. We also have endorphins, serotonin, oxytocin, and more. Together, they form a tapestry of emotions, pleasure, affection, motivation, calm, that shapes our inner world. If we choose to cultivate these more deliberately by seeking depth rather than quick fixes, we build a far more satisfying life. But if we stay on autopilot following every short-lived craving, we end up slaves to momentary impulses. Speaking of dopamine's power, it's also a key to major achievements. You might not realize how intense your motivation can be because we're designed to learn, persevere, and push our limits. Setting a lofty goal and steadily working toward it accumulates dopamine reserves for the long haul. The moment when you see the pieces come together, like finishing a big project, your brain rewards you with a huge rush, energizing you and boosting your mood. So why are so many people in this dopamine-driven society struggling? We live in an era of endless information, abundant food, and bite-sized entertainment. Our apps provide constant notifications, short clips, and fast food deliveries. It's not that technology is bad, but without moderation, we slip into an endless chase for immediate rewards. Inside, we're left feeling restless, bored, and stuck with an ever-growing to-do list that remains undone. Besides dopamine, there's also cortisol, the stress hormone. We get anxious about wasted time or incomplete tasks. Sometimes, rather than tackling the source of stress, we numb ourselves with the very thing that triggers mini dopamine bursts: social media, junk food, or useless diversions. Our stress then increases further because we aren't solving anything, leading us back to an even more desperate need for distractions. The real answer to anxiety lies in addressing our problems, not running away. If you're stressing over a deadline, the best remedy is to actually work on it, not skim through videos. Once you've made real progress, you can reward yourself in a measured way. Maybe a short walk, a single video, or a chapter in a favorite book. That's how you get healthier dopamine, reinforcing deeper achievements rather than stoking a cycle of avoidance. Food is another realm ripe for quick pleasures. Modern diets overflow with flavorful, highly processed meals that instantly light up our brain's reward center. Throughout human history, sweet or fatty foods were scarce, so our brains treat them as precious commodities. Today, these indulgences are everywhere, and when we fail to manage our eating habits, we risk constant overconsumption. We get a momentary thrill from that sweet or salty bite, but ultimately suffer health issues and a nagging sense of dissatisfaction. Rewiring these habits means pausing before you give in to temptation. Am I truly hungry, or am I just bored or stressed? If it's the latter, direct your energy into something constructive. Over time, your brain will learn that genuine pleasure comes from accomplishing worthwhile goals, not from a reflexive sugar rush. The same goes for digital entertainment and gaming. Many of us spend hours in these zones, then complain about how our time vanished. But if we set boundaries, say gaming only a couple of times a week, or checking social media in the morning and evening, we'll find that a small dose of leisure is plenty. Suddenly, our schedule opens up for meaningful work and our productivity can skyrocket. As for exercise, that's where dopamine and endorphins team up in a healthier way. Regular workouts supply a natural mood boost, runner's high, and strengthen the body. Endorphins help reduce pain and stress, giving a mild euphoria when you push yourself physically. At first, exercise can feel tedious, but once your body adapts, you'll experience a genuine lift in mood and energy. There's no need to go to extremes or live like a hermit. This isn't about banning all fun, it's about maintaining awareness of why you choose what you choose. Our brain has an internal balance system. When it's overheated by too many fast jolts of dopamine, we can't appreciate the more sustained joys of real life. But if we dial back the mindless stimuli, a simple walk, a heart-to-heart talk, or reading a good book can become vastly more enjoyable. One helpful technique is to break large objectives into smaller tasks. Then, after completing each mini-task, give yourself a small but mindful reward. It shouldn't be a free-for-all binge on social media, but perhaps a 10-minute break or a short, calming video. The key is to prevent that reward from overshadowing the main objective. Keep momentum on your core work and use these brief breaks as motivation boosters rather than escapes. But what if you already feel stuck in a serious dopamine pit? Step 1 is to admit there's a problem. That's the hardest part. Step 2 is gradually cutting back on your worst triggers. If you spend 4 or 5 hours a day on social media, try trimming it down by an hour or 2. Meanwhile, plan activities to fill the new gaps, whether it's a new hobby, helpful online courses, reading, or walking outside. Otherwise, you'll be tempted to revert to your old patterns. A third useful step is to schedule screen-free periods, especially before bedtime and right after waking up. Let's say you start your morning with 30 minutes of no phone. Use that time for stretching, hydrating, or journaling, and you'll find yourself calmer and more focused. Similarly, avoid diving into notifications right before you sleep. An evening crammed with digital stimulation often makes it harder to drift off and lowers sleep quality. Fourth, Create a healthier information environment. You don't have to abandon all entertaining content, but let it be a smaller fraction of your media diet replaced by more educational or inspirational sources. Subscribe to channels that offer tips on personal growth, psychology, or creativity. That way, even if you do go online, you're more likely to discover content that enriches you rather than purely distracting you. Fifth, remember the importance of real connections and face-to-face interactions. Oxytocin provides that sense of bonding and trust, a foundation for healthy friendships and relationships. When you have close people in your life to share joys and hardships, you won't feel as compelled to numb yourself with digital amusements. Often we grab our phones out of loneliness or boredom, so actively planning social outings and meaningful conversations cuts down on that aimless scrolling. Also, establish clear targets and a reward system. Say you're learning a new skill or aiming to improve your fitness. Break these goals into practical steps and track each accomplishment. Our brain loves clarity and incremental progress, so it will release expensive dopamine to keep us motivated. This approach is far more beneficial than microdoses from random memes or constant updates that ultimately lead nowhere. Be mindful that setting massive ambitions without a clear plan can backfire. If a goal seems unreachable, you'll just feel anxious and slip back into shallow pleasures. Instead, break large visions into smaller, doable milestones. That way, as you progress, your brain stays encouraged, fueling you with enough dopamine to keep going. By consciously using the reward system, we come to enjoy our work and life on a deeper level. Think of how different it feels to watch a film when you've chosen it as a well-earned prize after a busy day, rather than just slumping in front of Netflix all day. Or consider the intense satisfaction that comes from completing a challenge you've been working on diligently. This is real expensive dopamine, which bolsters your confidence and sense of purpose. It's worth noting that childhood experiences shape our grown-up relationship with instant gratification. A child who's always given anything they want right away, sweets, constant cartoons, zero rules, can grow up believing pleasure should always be instant. As adults, they may struggle to focus on or appreciate activities requiring patience. If you have kids or younger siblings around you, it's crucial to help them value meaningful processes rather than rely on gadget fixes the moment they're bored. As we've discussed, cortisol is another piece of the puzzle, signaling stress or threats. Sometimes we unconsciously increase our anxiety so we can soothe it with rapid dopamine hits, like worrying about our to-do list but jumping onto social media instead. But avoidance doesn't address the root problem, pushing us deeper into a cycle of guilt and stress. The healthier approach is to tackle the underlying issues and then reward ourselves with something small yet meaningful. Meanwhile, serotonin often ties in with dopamine. Serotonin boosts self-esteem and the feeling of being important. Social media exploits that mechanism, offering likes and uplifting comments that briefly raise our sense of status. We crave more validation, refreshing feeds endlessly. Combined with the dopamine rush, it can turn into a constant loop. Instead of dedicating ourselves to real-world accomplishments, we chase a fleeting sense of online worth. FOMO, the fear of missing out, feeds the dopamine loop too. We're afraid to miss any update, so we're drawn back to our phones at every chime. We never really find peace, our attention is forever scattered, and we're stuck in half-focus with a restless mind. But there's no need to despair. Dopamine is an unbelievably powerful ally when used intentionally. It propels us to grow, learn, and test our limits. Set a goal of mastering a musical instrument, for example, and your brain realizes that's a new horizon with big potential rewards. Then you gradually savor the process, building motivation day by day. The same applies to studies, career pursuits, or entrepreneurship. Used wisely, dopamine is the fuel that drives us forward. Some people confuse cutting back on pleasures with wisely managing resources. We don't need to ban every treat, food, music, TV shows. The question is how and when we consume them. A fragrant cup of coffee in the morning is wonderful, but if you drink it all day long, it loses its magic and may hurt your health. 1 or 2 entertaining videos are fine, but if you're glued to them for hours, you trigger that cheap dopamine loop. Short breaks are crucial for recharging. The trouble arises when your entire day consists of these mini breaks and no real work gets done. The main recommendation: Track how much time goes to mindless scrolling and gradually enforce limits on it. Then there's the idea of mindful leisure. Ask yourself, why not schedule an hour purely for watching funny videos or reading lightweight articles, guilt-free? Meanwhile, the rest of your day is dedicated to tasks leading to your long-term goals. That way, you don't deprive yourself entirely, but you also don't let unplanned entertainment overrun your schedule. One more critical point is the link between dopamine and self-esteem. When we try to ditch shallow pleasures but constantly slip, we wind up criticizing ourselves. Stress rises, and ironically, we crave more cheap thrills to feel better. Instead of self-blame, adopt a kinder approach. Big changes require time, and setbacks are normal. The objective is to learn from each slip-up and keep going. Patience and small wins are the best allies in the fight against cheap dopamine. A common question is, what about our emotional health? Sometimes we just want to relax and do nothing. Of course, we all need downtime, but if doing nothing becomes our primary mode day after day, it loses its restorative effect. As humans, we thrive on feeling that we're contributing something. If you turn your break into endless hours of passive scrolling, that's no longer rest. It's self-destructive. Real rest can be a good walk, conversation, or exploring new experiences, which are all deeply enriching. Ultimately, it comes down to choosing your sources of joy more consciously. Maybe you love painting, guitar, sports, or reading science fiction. By carving out space for these pursuits, dopamine naturally fuels your journey toward mastery. You gain satisfaction every day you improve, and it's not a fleeting rush, but a more stable sense of accomplishment. As we gradually shift our habits, we notice life becomes more vivid. We carve out time for real-world relationships, nature walks, or passions. Sleep improves because our minds aren't overloaded with endless stimuli. Our moods lift, and that constant underlying worry starts to recede. An important point: we can't always be on a dopamine high. Dopamine can't flow at max capacity all the time. Everyone experiences ups and downs. We need to accept fatigue as part of life, giving ourselves genuine rest without spiraling into pointless distractions. Balancing focused work with appropriate breaks maintains a solid level of health and motivation. In short, we're creatures capable of profound achievements. Our biology is wired to seek rewards, but if we chase only easy gains, we lose sight of real goals. The solution is to realize we can remap our own dopamine system. By clarifying our priorities, cutting out fake sources of pleasure, and focusing on activities that require dedication, we teach ourselves to relish slow, purposeful wins. And that can be life-changing. You can move toward your dreams step by step every single day. Write a plan, track your progress, learn new skills, and breathe at the right moments. At the same time, keep watch on where your energy and time go. If we discipline our dopamine a bit, it returns to being a loyal helper instead of a manipulative master. Finally, remember to be kind to yourself. Every transformation takes time, and mistakes will happen. Don't beat yourself up for occasional relapses, analyze what triggered them, and try a different approach next time. Our brains can adapt at any age, but it happens gradually. With patience, you'll gain the freedom to choose where your motivation flows. If you realize dopamine balance and healthy habits are important, start with small steps. Maybe cut back on certain stimulations for a week. Watch how your mood and routines evolve. Schedule one meaningful task with a planned reward. You'll discover the world can be more interesting without the mindless chase for instant highs. Dopamine is incredibly beneficial if used wisely. I'm wrapping up now, but your personal journey is only beginning. Remember, you have a remarkable brain with the capacity for great things. Whether your goals are big or small, near or far, you can achieve them if you harness your internal energy instead of scattering it. Savor that sense of genuine fulfillment that comes not from cheap hits, but from real focus. Ultimately, life is about uncovering your potential, not burying it under a flood of notifications. Thank you for sticking around until the end. I hope this inspires you to make some changes. By helping yourself, you can also help others. There are so many people out there feeling drained by a lack of real motivation. If you found this information useful, please share it with friends. Leave a like, subscribe, and comment on your best strategies for beating cheap dopamine. If we reach 5,000 likes, I'll release a special video on building good habits to combat laziness and transform your life. Thanks for watching and see you soon.